Leda. Why is she angry? Why is she crying? Why is she able to summon demonic beasts? Does she have a connection to Theodora, Queen of Salamis, or Hoppy from Fire Emblem Three Houses? Can history point us to the answers? Hello everyone, I'm Megan Sullivan, and welcome to the third episode in my series, The Secret History Behind Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave. In this series, I use real-world history to explain the fascinating story and themes behind Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave. And whether you're a Fire Emblem fan, a history fan, or both, I hope you find this series educational and entertaining. By the way, if you haven't already, you can check out the first two episodes in this new series on my History and Games channel. Alright, let's get started. So in the last episode, we talked about Queen Theodora of Salamis, who has entered the heroic games of Daxian, or Dagda? We have to wait for the official translation on this one, so she can defend the faith she holds dear. We explored the historical meaning behind her origins of Salamis and the significance of her name, which may be inspired by either the 3rd century saint Perpetua of Carthage or the 6th century Byzantine empress Theodora. Now, as I mentioned in the previous episode, the Eastern Roman Empress Theodora was of humble beginnings and started off as an actress and entertainer, one who used her beauty, wit, and charisma to climb the social ladder until she became empress of the powerful Byzantine Emperor Justinian. And one of the more salacious, though likely made-up tales about her, was that she performed a very lewd reenactment of the myth of Leda and the Swan, a story we'll get into in just a second. But Theodora in Fortune's Weave is not an entertainer, she's a warrior. However, there is a character in Fortune's Weave that just happens to be an entertainer, and her name is Leda. Who is she, and how will history shape her story? Let's talk about it. So in the teaser trailer for Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave, we get a brief glimpse of a girl with dark hair and dark skin. This is Leda, a sexy entertainer who can sing, dance, and call demonic beasts into battle. As of right now, we don't know much about her, except that she's experienced some sort of terrible loss, and that she's determined to wreak vengeance on the man responsible for that loss. So much so that she actually says in the trailer there is a man she hates so much that killing him won't be enough, implying she wants this man to suffer. Now, quick story speculation before we dive into the history portion of this episode, and mild spoilers for Three Houses. I think Leda's ability to call demonic beasts into battle is very interesting. This feels like something an evil Agarthan from Fire Emblem Three Houses could do, and I'm wondering if Leda is the victim of Agarthan experimentation, the way multiple characters in Fire Emblem Three Houses are, including Hoppy, who can summon monsters simply by sighing, whereas Leda seems to be able to summon them by singing. And some people pointed out that in one part of the Fortune's Weave trailer, Leda is fighting a man who kind of looks like a young nemesis. Could that be an Agarthan? Or is Leda actually gunning for the Divine Sovereign, whose Nabatean lineage suggests that he is an outsider to Daxian, and this may have done something extreme in order to control the local population? It's not out of the realm of possibility, because we know that although the Nabateans are the natural enemies of the Agarthans, and that the Nabateans are supposed to be the good guys, the Nabateans are not above atrocities of their own. With all that said, what awful thing could drive Leda to spend months or even years waiting to take revenge? Can we use history and culture to figure out the answer and make clear the drive behind Leda's motivation? Yes, we can. And the best way to do so is to look more closely at a specific clue: her name and the people connected to that name. And that name, of course, is Leda, an important figure in Greek mythology who is the mother of both the greatest of heroes and the most tragic of villains. The earliest sources we have for the name Leda goes back to both Homer's two major works, the Iliad and the Odyssey, written in the 8th century BCE, as well as a work known as the Catalogue of Women, which is attributed to Homer's contemporary Hesiod. According to these early accounts, Leda was a beautiful Spartan queen who caught the eye of the king of the gods, Zeus. Zeus seduced, or really attacked, Leda in the form of a swan and got her pregnant. But as it turns out, her mortal husband, King Tyndareus, had also gotten her pregnant, and the end result was two sets of twins. There were the twin boys, Castor and Polydeuces, also known as Castor and Pollux, and two girls, Clytemnestra and Helen. Yes, that Helen, the future Helen of Troy. Whether they were born or hatched from an egg, or eggs, depends on the storyteller, though the ancient Spartans were so keen on the idea of a sacred egg that they somehow acquired the sacred egg and showed it off to tourists, including the famous 2nd century travel writer Pausanias. I wonder what became of that sacred egg. At any rate, later on, the queen had more daughters by King Tyndareus, including Timandra, Phoebe, and Philinoi. But after that, we hear very little about Leda. She sort of retreats into the background at this point. No, though Leda herself plays a somewhat minor role in mythology, almost all of her children were famous, sometimes infamous, for one reason or another. Helen, of course, was famous for being the most beautiful woman in the world. Her twin brothers were heroes who went on all sorts of adventures. Ultimandra, Phoebe, and Philinoi had their own minor roles in myth. But today I want to focus on the most infamous of Leda's children, Clytemnestra, whose name is thought to mean something like famous for her schemes. It's her tragic and bloody tale of vengeance that may be the inspiration for Leda's rage in Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave. In the cycle of stories known as the Trojan War epic, which the Iliad and Odyssey are a part of, Clytemnestra was the wife of King Agamemnon of Mycenae, whom you might know as the leader of Homer's Achaeans, aka the Greeks, in the Iliad. The story goes that Agamemnon led the Greek army in a war against Troy in order to get back his brother's wife Helen, who had run off with the beautiful Trojan prince Paris. But according to an ancient work known as the Kypria, things got off to a rough start. First, the Greeks sailed from Aulis to what they thought was Troy, but ended up destroying the wrong city and were forced to go back. Then later, when gathered at Aulis again, this time with a proper guide who could actually lead them to the right place, they couldn't sail anywhere because the divine huntress Artemis had stopped the winds. This goddess hated Agamemnon because A, she was Team Troy since her twin brother Apollo was the city's patron deity, and B, Agamemnon had killed one of her sacred stags, thus disrespecting the divine huntress. Thus, in order to get the winds going again, Agamemnon first needed to appease the goddess by making a major sacrifice to her. In this case, his eldest daughter, Iphigenia, which he agreed to do. And so he lured Iphigenia to her doom by pretending he wanted her to come to Aulis in order to marry the young and handsome hero Achilles, which obviously was not true. Now, in Euripides' 5th century BCE play, Iphigenia at Aulis, Queen Clytemnestra learns of her husband's deceit and begs Achilles to save her daughter. And here we see a glimpse of her intelligence. She doesn't just appeal to Achilles' sense of valor, she appeals to his ego. Wasn't he angry that Agamemnon was using him as an unwitting tool in his murderous plot? Yes, he was, and he marches off to rescue the girl, even if it means he has to kill his own men to do so. But Iphigenia doesn't want anyone to die because of her, and so she bravely offers herself up to the goddess so that the heroes can continue their journey. But the oldest accounts, including the Kypria and Hesiod's Catalogue of Women, claim that Artemis felt sorry for the girl. It wasn't her fault her dad was a jerk, and saved Iphigenia at the last minute, though nobody knew it at the time. Now, what's interesting is that Homer, our earliest source for the Trojan cycle, never mentions Iphigenia or a sacrifice. He does, however, mention one Iphinasa, one of 3 daughters offered up as a bride to Achilles by the Mycenaean king. But the hero rejected the offer because he really hated Agamemnon. Spoiler alert, everyone hates Agamemnon. At any rate, Iphinasa was safe at home, and as it turns out, Iphigenia ended up safe too. But again, nobody knew that. Everyone just assumed Iphigenia was dead, and this traumatic incident is what triggered Clytemnestra's bloodthirsty quest for vengeance. While Agamemnon spent 10 years fighting the Trojans, Clytemnestra spent 10 years weaving an intricate plot to take down her husband. But she couldn't do it alone, so she enlisted the help of her husband's cousin Aegisthus, whose father had a very bad falling out with Agamemnon's father, and so now the two sides of the family were feuding. And we don't really have time to cover that whole story today, but I assure you it's wild. Seriously, I do not know what is up with the House of Atreus and its penchant for killing children and feeding them to people. At any rate, Clytemnestra enlisted or was seduced by Agamemnon's cousin, and together they built a strong coalition of allies while waiting for an opportunity to get rid of the Mycenaean king. And they finally got that opportunity once the Trojan War ended and Agamemnon sailed home. Now, according to Homer, Clytemnestra and Aegisthus teamed up and attacked Agamemnon during a welcome home feast, but the more popular version of the tale had Clytemnestra lure her husband into a false sense of security once he got home, and then killed him in his bath before murdering his poor mistress, the Trojan princess Cassandra, who was actually kidnapped by Agamemnon. There are some slight variants to this tale, by the way, but this is kind of the main one. Once the king was dead, the queen performed the terrifying act of maskalismos, the act of chopping off a murder victim's limbs in the hopes the victim's ghost would likewise be hobbled and couldn't attack them. After that, she marries her husband's cousin, and they rule Mycenae pretty much unmolested for nearly a decade. But then Clytemnestra's son Orestes, who was spirited out of Mycenae after his father's murder, returns to kill his uncle and his mother for killing his father for killing his sister. And you'd think that would be the end of the story, but it's not. Like Leda in Fortune's Weave, Clytemnestra can call on demonic powers to help her, and with her dying breath, she calls upon the Furies, winged underworld goddesses that punished murderers by making them go crazy, which, according to the playwright Aeschylus, is exactly what happens to Orestes. After killing his mother, he goes insane, has to go to Delphi to be cleansed of the taint of murder, then he has to go to Athens where there's a trial, Orestes is found not guilty, there's much talk about how an impartial jury trial is better than endless blood feuds. If you've read or seen the Orestia trilogy by Aeschylus, it's obvious there's an allegory in here about the merits of Athenian democracy, but never mind. And after that, Orestes is free to live his life. By the way, Sophocles and Euripides, two other 5th century BCE playwrights, have their own version of what happens to Orestes after he murders his mother. But unfortunately, we don't have time to cover all of that here. So with that, Orestes goes on to live another day. Until, that is, he dies of a snake bite, which is rather ironic because snakes just happen to be messengers of the underworld. Did his mother finally get her vengeance? Maybe, and tragedy continues to fall upon the family collectively known as the House of Atreus until that house completely collapses. Now, there are plenty of unsavory, villainous characters in the House of Atreus, but ancient Greek authors go out of their way to make Queen Clytemnestra the worst of them. They portray her as an unfaithful, bloodthirsty, overly clever woman whose intelligence and warlike behavior defied traditional gender roles. To them, she got exactly what she deserved, and in fact, the 5th century poet Pindar celebrated Orestes' matricide during a poetic ode to an athlete. And yes, it's as weird and off-topic as it sounds. But although she's very, very bad for killing poor Cassandra, Clytemnestra's ultimate motivation to avenge her daughter, whom nobody else seemed to care was dead, is understandable. So we've talked about myth, but is there any actual history here? At first, it seems like the answer is no. Although we have Bronze Age tablets that record names like Achilles, Atreus, and even Alexandros, the alternative name for the Trojan prince Paris, nobody has ever found evidence of a Bronze Age queen named Clytemnestra. But there is some iconography and archaeological evidence that suggests that authors like Homer were inspired by the dim memory of real Bronze Age queens. For example, Greek iconography shows Clytemnestra wielding a double axe when attacking Agamemnon or Cassandra, which was a real Bronze Age weapon used in elaborate Mycenaean rituals by powerful priestesses. These priestesses also either handled serpents as part of a ritual or worshipped a goddess who could control them, as seen by a number of votive offerings in the shape of a woman holding a snake, again a symbol of chthonic powers, in each hand. And this is important because Clytemnestra is able to call upon the Furies, who not only had wings, but are sometimes portrayed with snakes in their hair, or their hair is actually made of snakes. And finally, there is a famous beehive-shaped Tholos tomb in Mycenae that may have belonged to a powerful Bronze Age queen, which is why it's known today as the Tomb of Clytemnestra. But what about the whole child sacrifice thing? Unfortunately, we do have some archaeological evidence of children being sacrificed around the Mediterranean during the late Bronze Age, so this story may be based on a faint memory of a very dark past. At any rate, Clytemnestra may not be real, but her pain very much was. And that pain and need for vengeance could be the inspiration for Leda in Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave. At any rate, we'll find out more about Leda soon, and we'll likely return to this topic in a later episode. But in the meantime, we'll be taking a closer look at another character from Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave, Diedrich, the dark and brooding swordsman who for some reason is also participating in the heroic games. Is he related to a controversial figure in Fire Emblem Three Houses? Does he connect to ancient Carthage, Rome, or Greek history in any way? Stay tuned to find out. Until then, thanks so much for supporting History and Games, everyone. See you later.